The arrival of Ocean's loyalists was a great moment for all dragons of Pareena, who looked upon the mighty Seawing princess. Soldiers by her side, lockstep in march, singing songs of praise and flying high the banners as they make their way into the pages of history. Onlookers all around cheering them on, for they hold the only hope of the common folk. Ocean had to shake those thoughts from her mind. This wasn't a time for plotting her glorious rise to fame. That was over. This was war. Her war. And she had to commit her all to it. For this war was now a war without end. Hi, I'm your host Heatwave, and let me lead you through the pages of history once again. The war is far from over, and the Tyrant was about to finally meet his end times through the fire and darkness of war once again. You should have seen him. Hit him right in the eye. He was thrashing around in the mud like an idiot, calling for his mama to save him. They call themselves warriors. Hey. Oh, sorry, Toad. We didn't mean... That's someone's son. Lying dead in the dirt. Show some respect. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Tyrant's Legion had amassed their forces in the northwestern plains of the Wet Spring Rainforest, bunkered down just below the lowest peak of Claw Mountain. The Tyrant's forces made camp. Their orders were to begin a new campaign into the Wet Spring Rainforest. The Tyrant was upset that the Mudwings and Rainwings would dare declare war on him or his armies. Their destruction was to be swift and quick. The poor weather and climate of Claw Mountain led to a campaign of chance and, frankly, wasn't productive at all to the Tyrant's goals. Sure, the Icewings technically had been defeated. Their will to lash out and attack has been blunted. But their full destruction was not achieved, so a small force of inductii were left behind on that frozen peak to make sure the Icewings do not counterattack. The Wet Spring Rainforest, though, had its own fair share of issues. First was that it was a rainforest. That means long vines, thick mud, and thousands of really small and really annoying insects that bite. Plus the lack of visibility. How was a large military force supposed to move through the rainforest and maintain some sense of cohesion and tactical flexibility? Not to mention, the inductii had not a clue exactly what the military response of the Rainwing Mudwing Collective could be. Did they have an army? Did they have weapons and equipment? What was their command structure like? The Tyrant's legions were walking into a fight they found disrespectful to their skill, training, and prestige. Viper wanted to burn the whole thing to the ground. It was far easier than sending his soldiers into a doomed campaign. But his orders were very clear. Take the rainforest without any collateral damage. Viper had to thus create a new, cunning tactic. And while we reflect on the fact that Viper's battle plans were not always successful, they were quite impressive. At least to this Sandwing narrator, of course. The Wet Spring Rainforest has, of course, a very different geography than Claw Mountain. While Claw Mountain was impossible to scale, the rainforest was flat. One could fly over the rainforest from end to end. That was a better plan than marching his inductee into the Wet Spring Rainforest itself. Plus, Viper knew better by now, to hurry up while on campaign. The Tyrant was becoming impatient as the war dragged on further. Viper's new grand strategy was to send out his inductee scouts to survey the entirety of the rainforest. Their smaller unit tactics and use of camouflage will allow them to operate mostly unseen in the rainforest. Viper had no idea where all the Mudwings and Rainwings were. He suspected they would be spread out, rather than being concentrated to a single location. If his recon forces can locate the primary palace of the Wet Spring Rainforest, and where the collective's leaders live, well, Viper will deploy his inductee in a decapitation strike, attack their palace and bypass the mess that was the rainforest. The idea is simply to attack the leader and kill them swiftly. The shock and awe of the strike will throw the collective into disarray. Mopping them up should be easy enough, or maybe if a new leader rises up, they'll have the intelligence to surrender to the Tyrant's forces. Either way, the Reconnaissance was sent into the rainforest, and they didn't get far. The recon inductee spent hours after rough and tough hours pulling and digging themselves out of the mud or hacking their way through vast vines and undergrowth. They had no coordination. The lush brush swallowing section after section, it felt impossible to find anything. The Rainwings didn't have much in the way of architecture, so finding and using a landmark was not helping the inductee. But as the loud and proud Sandwings brute forced their way through the greenery, they were being watched. You'd expect Pareena Rainwings to not be that good at staying hidden. The vast range of colours their scales come in doesn't really make them very stealthy. Except, staying hidden is one of the Rainwings' specialty. In very old and ancient times, before the Mudwing migration, Rainwings were once hunted by some of the largest predators. Panthers, tigers, massive birds, and of course, giant snakes. While it would be a hard fight, these natural rainforest animals could take down a Rainwing, especially smaller dragonettes. So, the Rainwings of old developed far more intelligent ways of escaping these hardships, living off the forest floor, finding ways to camouflage themselves, and learning how to use the vast gardens of powerful, deadly, and helpful plants of the Wet Spring Rainforest. A Rainwing warrior at this time wore nothing in the terms of armor. Weaved with plant fibers, pouches, bags, and slings were all that could be carried. During the War of Unification, Rainwings were the only winglet to use mostly ranged weapons throughout the war. Sure, a small Mudwing smith knife could be carried, but this was more meant to cut open fruit. Rainwings used a variety of blow darts, slingshots, and other small ranged weapons to attack from hiding or positions of strength. These weapons could deliver powerful toxins and hardy poisons developed from the thousands of plants and green material growing all over the rainforest. Like the hefty gourd seed pods, or the mushed up skin of a lemon death frog. At this time, the Rainwings painted their scales in war markings. This has been a Mudwing clan tradition for centuries, even before the migration. Yet, because of the now Rainwing clan, they too adopted the practice. These Rainwings were tasked in keeping eyes on the Sandwings. Melon was smart enough to have a great deal of foresight. It would be dumb to assume that after declaring the Tyrant an enemy, they wouldn't see any retaliation. But what to do was based on how the other clans felt. Melon called a grand meeting, where each clan of the collective could voice their opinions. Each clan leader would represent the voice and the will of their clan. In old times, the clans would war among themselves. It's just how Mudwings did stuff. Yet it was very respectful. Even the Mudwings during the War of Unification showed respect towards the Sandwings. In the clan hierarchy, there was Beast of Clan Crocker, the biggest and strongest clan, with a proud history of conquest. Clan Whiskerfish was led by Pignose. Pignose preferably liked to talk about issues, but he had no issues leading the fight when diplomacy fails. Clan Muckfly was led by Mangrove. Mangrove was more concerned about the safety of his clan in particular than the whole collective, which, in the eyes of his other clan leaders, was seen as a bit selfish. And finally, the Rainwing clan, Clan Flutter, led by Alavera. This plucky young Rainwing believes his winglet is more than capable of handling any issue or situation, and was very eager to show off his skills. When Melon raised the issue to the clans, they were divided. Flutter and Beast wanted to take up arms and fight. Mangrove was undecided. He couldn't think of how fighting would help anyone. Why not just hide? The rainforest is big enough and they can camouflage themselves. The Sandwings would give up eventually. Fighting would lead to the deaths of many dragons, especially those Mudwings living on the outer edges of the Wet Spring Rainforest. While Pignose also agreed in hiding, he believed it wouldn't actually work either way. Fighting was most likely going to be the only course of action. Melon was the tiebreaker. He wanted to fight, regardless of the casualties. The needs of the collective outweigh the needs of a few distant Mudwings. Orders were passed down to those few Rainwings already watching the struggling Sandwings. Orders were to drive them out as they saw fit to do so. A lot of freedom was given to such small, independent teams. While they may not look intimidating, those few Rainwings would demonstrate why they are not pushovers. They waited, and waited, patiently, for a single slip-up, as the Sandwings mucked around trying to dig themselves out of the mud. From the trees, from the shrubs, and the shadows flew small bright green spore pods, sling-shotted from anywhere and all directions. With the slightest touch, they burst into a misty cloud, blinding the Sandwing inductii, reducing their vision and making their ears ring as the toxins numbed their ears. In the confusion, the Rainwings darted and bolted around the Sandwings, their small size allowing them to weave and dance between the dazed soldiers. But that's not all. Some Rainwings carried small tree stems that looked like raw sugarcane, but rather, these are the stems from an agonizer crop. These stems were broken in half, creating a sharp point covered in sap. As the Rainwings dashed through the inductii, they stabbed them with their agonizers. The sap from the agonizer crop is a potent neurotoxic chemical. Once introduced into the bloodstream, it causes the pain center of the brain to become overloaded with stimulation. To the Sandwings, it felt like they were on fire, falling to the ground in fits of pain and spasms. They could do nothing but wail in pure agony, giving the Rainwings time to escape the fight. These hit-and-run tactics took the Sandwings off guard, and as they limped back to Viper, the Legomite was none too pleased. He ordered his inductii to keep pressing on, But take care. They needed to find the palace of the Wet Spring Rainforest. That was their #1 objective. Once that was found, all the other pieces could fall into place. The inductee made sure to check every bush, every slight rustle of leaves, stabbing anything that didn't look right. But the Rainwings still ambushed them, this time luring the Sandwings into spots they had trapped and began to drop beehives on the inductee, or throw the dust of hallucinogenic plants in their faces. There were moments of loss though. Some of the toxins worked differently for different dragons. These Rainwings did suffer casualties, especially as the inductee shot them full of arrows or hacked them apart. The Sandwings were not making much progress, but the collective failed to break their will to fight. Viper needed to speed things along. He split his forces into 3 groups. The 2nd Tyrant's Legion would head to the south and then southeast of the Wet Spring Rainforest, while the 3rd Tyrant's Legion would go north but then head towards the northeast. The idea was to scout around the perimeter of the rainforest, while the 1st Legion scouts push into the rainforest itself. Both the 2nd and 3rd were on the lookout for a buildup of Rainwing and Mudwings, for that has to be the sign of a palace or their leader's homestead. The 3rd Tyrant's Legion scoured the northeastern edge, finding themselves in the lower valley. And they found no real sign of Mudwings or Rainwings. No, actually, they found groups of Seawings wandering around. Well, that sure was strange. The advanced scouts attempted to talk to the Seawings, figure out if they were friends or foes. Maybe the Seawings had joined the Tyrant. Well, it would be good to have more troops to throw at the Wet Spring Rainforest, more cannon fodder. But the Seawings ignored them. They paced around the inductee like sharks in the sea. Before the Sandwings could make sense of the situation, the Seawings, who were only a few steps away, lunged forward and stabbed their coral blades into the inductee. When the scouts didn't report back, more of the 3rd Legion marched down to investigate. This was a mistake. Ocean's loyalists hid among the rolling hills of the lower valley, springing up to attack at the right opportunity. Cinnamon taught them how to fight effectively, but they still had a long way to go. Taking cover, Ocean's loyalists used bows to fly arrows downrange at the confused and exposed Sandwings. This fire was ineffective at most. Many of the Seawings had never seen, let alone fired, a bow before, but the suppressive fire allowed Ocean to move up in an advantageous position. This was the princess's first experience of real, death-defying combat. This wasn't pretend, this wasn't a game between dragonettes. Cinnamon was in this battle too. She kinda had to be, and it was quite awe-inspiring watching her bark orders and lead the loyalists. Especially when she yelled at Ocean to keep her head down. In fact, Ocean was actually kind of scared. This was her first introduction into warfare, nothing like what her grandfather was training her for. Typhoon and the other Seawing Royal Guard chaperoned Ocean while the battle was going on around them. Yet, the Loyalists were taking a few casualties, and even to Cinnamon's best efforts, the battle seemed to be going nowhere. So, Ocean, not wanting to be useless in her first fight, surged ahead over the hills. In the confusion, the other sections of Ocean's loyalists, moving on her left and right flank, followed the princess's example and charged forward. All the while, Cinnamon was yelling for everyone to fall back in line. She yelled over at Ocean, demanded that she gets her ass back here. The chaos of battle drowned out the Mudwing hybrid as Ocean found herself face to face with the snarling Sandwing inductee. With clashing steel, breaking bones, and bloody talons, Ocean's loyalists had their first clash with the Tyrant's Legion. Those attacking from the flanks of Ocean slammed into the Sandwings. They were in danger of being encircled by the Seawings. The Loyalists fought valiantly and with courage, despite their lack of professionalism. While one Loyalist could spear a Sandwing could cut down a Loyalist in a, by far, brutaler fashion. In the whirlwind of the melee, though, Ocean would claim her first kill. An inductee, taller than her, wearing a bigger, more stylized helmet. He too drew his sword, but a single, devastating thrust into his belly by Ocean ended his offensive. This is, well, was Legomite Arizona, who was just appointed as the new Legomite of the 3rd Tyrant's Legion. With the unexpected and frankly brutal death of their new commander, a lone officer called out an order to fall back and regroup. These Seawings will pay for daring to attack the Tyrant's Legion. The inductee will return with the might of their brother legions to crush these worms and put their heads on spikes. The Sandwings turned tail and retreated. Finally, Ocean's Loyalists had won their first battle. They had bloodied their talons. This was a moment of triumph. Yet it wasn't without sorrow. The Loyalists did have dead and wounded they needed to attend to. Something Cinnamon wanted to avoid. They didn't have the manpower to waste. Speaking of which, Cinnamon stomped over to Ocean, the towering Mudwing looming over the little princess. She let off an ear-bursting scream at Ocean. What in the 3 moons was that? What was she thinking? Cinnamon had everything under control. That kind of stunt cost lives. What if Ocean was killed? That wouldn't help anyone. But Cinnamon smiled. In Ocean's bold tactic, she won the battle, killed a Legomite of all things, and showed her Loyalists that she was ready to face anything, that she would fight alongside the Grunts. Cinnamon admired that, and gave Ocean some leeway. The battle was won, but now was no time to rest. Cinnamon was under the idea that if the Tyrant's legions were this far into the lower valley, and this close to the Wet Spring Rainforest, then something must have happened. Ocean, unfortunately, had to attend to the laying of the Seawing dead, in their traditional way, of course. So, it was up to Cinnamon. If the Mudwing still existed, they could help, and Cinnamon, being a hybrid Mudwing, would go a long way with making as many friends as possible. Cinnamon set out alone. It was strange. She had never met another Mudwing before. While her father may not have been born in the Wet Spring Rainforest, there was still a slight feeling that she was coming home. Sandwing Mudwing hybrids were not all that common. Cinnamon stood out in the rainforest. She couldn't go unnoticed. Yet the general population of Rainwings and Mudwings accepted Cinnamon on the spot as kin. She was half Mudwing, of course, so that helped. But it was disappointing to them. She didn't have any understanding of their culture, their clan system, which actually surprised Cinnamon. She spent her whole life believing that Mudwings were dumber than rocks. From the Sandwing perspective, though. Melon met with Cinnamon. Talk was going around about a strange hybrid after all. The two engaged in a deep conversation lasting many hours. Cinnamon explained who she was, a former soldier of the Tyrant, now an ally for the welfare of all dragons. She requested that the Wet Spring Rainforest show what support and supplies they can, and in return, Ocean's Loyalists will protect the collective. Melon wasn't exactly convinced. What's all this about freedom fighting? Cinnamon spoke of Navada, his dream and goals, a united Pareena for all dragons. Yet, Melon still wasn't convinced. Navada was still the son of the Tyrant. The fact that his own son wanted to overthrow him should say something about the personality of the Tyrant and his child. How could he trust this Navada? And now a Seawing princess was involved? What was so good about this Navada, about this ocean? Yet again, Cinnamon explained. While the Tyrant was busy abusing her, Navada showed compassion, taught her to read and write, how the world works. Cinnamon doesn't have much good in her life. Why would she throw all that away on a whim? The other hybrid made a good point, it seemed. Melon could see from her scars that she was being honest. So, he agreed to give Cinnamon a chance. If she can remove the Sandwings from his rainforest, the collective will support her, Navada, and the Seawing princess with whatever they needed. Food, medical supplies, weapons of the Mudwing forges, and manpower. The collective will back her if she can provide proof of her intentions. Upon that notion, Cinnamon returned to Ocean's loyalist. She told Ocean her new plan. And this time, they couldn't afford any muck-ups. Ocean's loyalists regrouped inside the Wet Spring Rainforest. The Seawings found great interest in exploring another winglet, especially the similar ideals. The Rainwing Dragonettes found the Seawing visitors oh so interesting. Cinnamon met with Beast and those of her clan, Clan Crocker. They had willingly assembled themselves for war, the traditional Mudwing way. In fact, Beast can't remember the last time the Mudwings were preparing for war in this very way. The last stories she heard were probably before the Great Migration. They opened the forges and began arming the Mudwings and Rainwings equally. The Mudwing warriors during the War of Unification painted their scales in their traditional clan war markings. Each clan had its own set of markings, and was once used to identify the different clans on the battlefield. Unfortunately, most resources were spent on weapons, rather than armor, so there was an abundance of spears, swords, and even big sticks. Rocks wrapped in stones were also a sight, based on Rainwing slingshot technology. Other field equipment could be clay bottles, green material, or other Mudwing trinkets. Cinnamon's grand strategy started with what she already knew. Those Sandwings they battled were from her old legion, 3rd Legion. They were never big enough to take the Wet Spring Rainforest by themselves, so Viper had to be here as well. Rainwing scouts informed her that in the parts closest to the mountains, the Sandwings began taking the outer-lying areas of the Wet Spring Rainforest. While their progress is slow, it is steady. Cinnamon had a long thought about this. Viper is expecting some elaborate sneak attack, some clever traps and guerrilla warfare like he experienced on Claw Mountain. So, what if the collective did the opposite? Oh, what if Cinnamon just sicked the Mudwings on Viper and his troops? He thinks Mudwings are just big dumb brutes. Fine. She will give them exactly that. As the Inductii continued their advance into the Wet Spring Rainforest, there was a tiny rumble, a rustle in the trees. Why, what's to worry? The Wet Spring Rainforest is full of all manner of animals. Yet animals don't crush shrubs under their weight. Animals don't come barreling down on the Inductii like the rainforest manifesting its anger. The Mudwings, covered in their war markings, stomped, trampled, and stormed out of the bushes and trees. A Mudwing stood taller than a Sandwing. Their bodies are larger, fatter, more muscular. strong enough to crush the bones of smaller dragons. They didn't need fancy armor or weapons. They slammed into the Sandwings, and at that close range, they unleashed those full, pent-up might. One hefty punch from a Mudwing could shatter a skull. It didn't matter. It didn't matter if the Mudwings were stabbed, slashed, or hit. They just kept coming, their physique great enough to overcome these slight wounds. The Mudwing attack was feral and barbaric. Some Mudwings crushed windpipes effortlessly, others drowned the inductii under layers of mud, holding them down. And as the Sandwing reinforcements attempted to aid their fellow inductii, the Rainwings put themselves into the fight. From behind the charging Mudwings and in the trees above, the Rainwings began picking off the Sandwings who got stuck in the undergrowth. Using their blowpipes and rock slingshots, they provided a rudimentary form of covering fire to their Mudwing kin. The desperate inductii tried to consolidate and recruit, but that just made them a bigger target. They formed a defensive ring, spears at the ready, and they held out for a while. Eventually, they were overrun by the sheer amount of Mudwings and the focus fire of the Rainwings. The Sandwings finally pulled back. This mere battle cost the collective a bit. Many Mudwings and Rainwings lay dead, yet the Sandwing corpses were piled higher. The Mudwings engaged in their wartime tradition of honoring the dead. They buried each Sandwing casualty neatly, respectfully, in a grave along one of the many rivers in the Wet Spring Rainforest. They respected the Sandwings as worthy enemies, and thus Beast led Clan Crocker in a moment of mourning for them. With the Sandwings halted and routed from the Wet Spring Rainforest, it was a great victory not only for Ocean's loyalists, but the collective as well. Melon was very pleased. There might be potential for this little alliance. Ocean did meet Melon, and let's just say, while the Seawing was good with words, this Navada had more sense of the politics of things. Melon wasn't really that impressed. While Cinnamon was off fighting, Ocean mingled around the populations. She led speeches and open discussions on why dragons should join the loyalists. Ocean met with what was left of the Rockwings, saw their sorrow. She promised swiftness and just vengeance. This did move Melon enough to encourage dragons to join the Seawing. If this leads to the Tyrant's death, then why not support the Seawing princess? That's how he figured it. Finally, all this new blood would help swell Ocean's loyalists. While it was not the great volunteer tsunami that Ocean wanted, more members was good nonetheless. But for the Sandwings, Viper had no choice but to pen his after-action report to the Tyrant. Taking the Wet Spring Rainforest intact will deplete his forces that will leave the Sandwing Kingdom open for effective retaliation. He wrote that he could not continue this fight on good faith, for the good of his own soldiers. The Seawings had joined the war on their own side. When such a letter reaches his lord and master, Viper was as sure as dead. And he would be right. The Tyrant was beyond hysterical at this, and now the Seawings have joined the fight on their own allegiance? At the Tyrant's screaming of Seawing, Navada appeared. He calmed his father. This was a good thing. The Tyrant owned all the land west of Pareena's spine. The Skywings was his closest ally. What the Tyrant should do is retreat his forces to a more defensive position and draw out his enemies. Think about it. The Seawings and the Collective will have to attack far from their bases of operation, stretching their supplies thin. Why, Poor logistics can be deadlier to an army than any sword or soldier. The Tyrant agreed. Navada made a lot of sense and was totally not manipulating him whatsoever. Sending word to Viper, he was given new orders. Recall his forces to the Gap and the Mojave, and prepare to defend the Sandwing Kingdom with their lives. Winter rolled in, and the Tyrant's legion fell back as ordered. Ocean and her loyalists had bloodied their talons. The Wet Spring Rainforest was now safe, and its bounty of supplies was oceans for the taking. Navada had begun the final steps of his plan in the shadows. He was making moves and convincing his dear old dad that he should listen to every word he says. What's next to come? Well, the Mojave. There's nowhere left for the Sandwings to hide now. But that's a story for another episode.